the leading non-candidate.
Oh, no, you don't. Nobody's going to want to vote for me. Most people don't vote for the candidates they do have. What makes you think they'll vote for a candidate they don't have? Ow, my head's stuck.
Well, maybe that's what they've been waiting for. A candidate they don't have, so they don't have to vote for someone they wouldn't have voted for anyways. You follow that?
You got a point there, boy, I think.
Well, I don't. Every election year is the same thing. All of you change from honest, loyal, trustworthy friends into a bunch of, well, I don't know how else to say it, politicians.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we are talking about Go Pogo from 1980, based on the comic strip Pogo by Walt Kelly. Pause the podcast.
Well, first you got to find it. Well, I mean, it is easy to find because it's on YouTube,
It's on
I suppose.
YouTube, yes.
But it's not as though you can buy it in the shops.
No.
Or watch it on the television.
Yeah, no need to pause, I guess.
No. And it's not much of a story. There aren't any.
No, that's
It's
true.
pretty hard to spoil the jokes because there's about 10 every second.
The big spoiler is Pogo does not get elected president of the United States of America. Sorry if you didn't know how it was gonna turn out. Okay, so I did say that there was going to be a connection to our previous episodes.
Yes, you did.
There are two specific connections. One is there's a scene in American Splendor. It's in the comic when Harvey Pekar and Robert Crumb first start hanging out, and Crumb comes over to Pekar's house, and he's going through his comics, and he finds this comic called Peter Wheat by Walt Kelly, and he says, this Peter Wheat by Walt Kelly is pretty rare. And Pekar's like, is it worth anything? Let me see that. And that's the end of the panel. And that actually made it into the movie, that exact conversation about Walt Kelly's Peter Wheat.
Right.
And also, the voice actor.
Yes. I wondered if you'd find
for
this.
Skip Hinnant, who was the voice actor for Pogo, is also the voice actor of Fritz the Cat.
And
Yeah.
he was in the original cast of the Peanuts musical. You're
Whoa.
a Good Man, Charlie Brown.
Wow.
Where he played Schroeder.
I didn't know that. I did find that he was the narrator of the Electric Company Spidey Super Stories segments. That was one of my first exposures to, like, Spider-Man. I might have seen the cartoon before that, but that was a big deal because this live-action bit, I really looked forward to it whenever it was on Electric Company.
But the fact that Skip Hinnant has voiced Fritz the Cat and Pogo the Possum
Bizarre.
is because these two movies couldn't be more different.
Yeah, yes.
That is really something. And the Penguins thing is just the cherry on top, really.
Yeah.
Peanuts, rather. Peanuts
yeah.
thing, not Penguins thing.
Yeah. So Walt Kelly was an animator at Disney from 36 to 41. There was a animator strike at Disney in 41. He didn't want to take sides, so he quit. He had a background in journalism, and he was a political cartoonist for a little while.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
None of these things are surprising.
Because it all
in various
plays
ways.
into Pogo.
I'm picking and choosing details that, fit my narrative of what Pogo is.
That's just...
I'm leading
That's what you
the
do.
version.
That's the nature of...
Yeah.
of argument.
Yes. So, during the war, apparently he had some sort of physical issue and he wasn't fit for combat or something like that. So, like many cartoonists, he was drawing, as we saw in Sad Sack and eventually Will Eisner, etc. All these guys were drawing manuals or things like that. Or
Al Cap as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
In fact, Al Cap and Walt Kelly were friends.
Yes.
Which is funny, because in some ways their strips are very similar.
Yes. But he was drawing manuals for the foreign language unit. Apparently.
Wow.
This is another thing that, like, okay, this fits the puzzle.
Because he does a lot of wordplay.
It's beyond wordplay. This is word soup salad. This is a jumbled mess. Now, there was 26 years of Pogo, from like 48, 49 up until about 75.
Yep.
Now, unlike Peanuts, which I have read all 18,000 strips of, with Pogo, I probably read about 3 or 4 years. Because what tends to happen is I'll start reading it and go, wow, this is amazing. And then probably about 2 weeks worth of strips in, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And then I tend to not come back to it.
Yeah. That makes... This is an example of... This would have been great to read one a day.
Yes.
In a newspaper.
Absolutely.
Because the Peanuts ones are so simple, so minimalist.
Yeah.
This is maximalist.
Yes. Yes.
Not only are the drawings really detailed, but they are just crammed full of dialogue.
Yeah.
And not just dialogue, but, as you said, word soup salad.
Yes.
Plays on words.
Yeah. Vernacular, puns, malapropisms.
Yep.
You got your fractured grammar, weird spelling of stuff.
Yep.
It's supposed to be like this kind of southern dialect. It's all mangled. Also, it's like, it's, tied into the art. There's the lettering, too, because some characters, like Deacon Mushrat, has a...
It's Gothic font.
It's a Gothic font. It's like an illuminated manuscript.
Yep.
And this other character shows up later, P.T. Bridgeport.
Yes.
And he's a bear, but he speaks in a P.T. Barnum, he speaks in circus signs, like big top signs, with all the, like, fancy lettering, all that kind of stuff.
You got to put in the work.
Yeah, it's all coming at you.
Yep.
In terms of the art, which is like, you can see the Disney animator style in there with all the...
Oh, they do look like Disney characters. They're very cutesy.
Yes. And the body language and all that kind of stuff is coming out. It looks like a Disney cartoon on paper, but then you've got all this language coming at you, and the language is even lettered in a way that's really... You have to lean in and pay attention to it.
Yes. Yes.
But you're totally there in that world, but you can't be in that world for more than
I would agree.
a couple of weeks.
I'm reading these and I just want to love them.
Yeah.
And I want to, but it's exhausting reading them.
Yes.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of reading Little Abner by Al Capp.
Yeah.
But with Little Abner, you're just dealing with that crazy language that he's writing it in, that phonetic southern accent.
Yeah.
Here, not only do you have that, but you have, as you pointed out, you've got plays on words, malapropisms, you've got Yoda-style grammar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's heavy going.
Yeah.
And of course the subject is often serious, the subject matter that he's discussing.
Yes. There's that too. We haven't even gotten to that. A lot of times you're trying to untangle the coding of who's he pointing the finger at or whatever.
This is a very satirical strip.
Yeah.
Satiring current events that were occurring when he was writing them. Unusually so for a cartoonist of that era.
Yeah.
That is someone writing in the funny pages, not drawing political cartoons.
Right.
And so
right. Sometimes the strips got moved to the op-ed page.
They did indeed.
Yeah.
They did.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit.
I have a whole section on censorship that we can come back to.
Okay. So it's set in Okefenokee Swamp. I'm going to mispronounce that a couple times through the episode because sometimes I tend to say Oki. I can't even mispronounce it the right way.
Okefenokee.
It's Okefenokee. There are a bunch of animal characters. Your main one is Pogo Possum. He's our kind of everyman.
Yep.
He loves fishing. He's quite, as Walt Kelly himself described him, is naive and soft-hearted. He's who we like to imagine we ourselves are.
Yep.
There's Albert the alligator. He's the extrovert. Hilariously tends to eat other characters accidentally from time to time, including the frog and an amoeba in one sequence. And he's accused of being a cannibal. Because there's Howland Owl. He's the supposed big brain, but he's actually a complete idiot. Tends to have stupid ideas and theories about everything. There's a turtle named Churchy La Femme. It's short for Churchill, but it's supposed to sound like Cherchez La Femme.
Yeah.
He is Owl's best friend. He sings songs. That's another thing. There's song lyrics in some of these that. Yeah.
He was a poet as well, Walt Kelly.
Right. Okay.
So you get a lot of that in.
Oh, and there's there's like Child Roland kind of. There's quotations of poetry.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes.
I mean, we've been hinting at it as who's the target audience for this? Because I can see little kids being like, ooh, look at these cute animal characters, and not being able to understand a word of anything that's happening panel to panel. I certainly had to lean right in on some of those poetry quotations and like go back to my university days trying to figure out what the hell Churchy was talking about.
Yeah, and he would rewrite song lyrics or rewrite poetic quotations with sort of Mondegreen versions where you misheard lyrics.
Yeah.
So most famously is Deck Us All with Boston Charlie.
Yes.
Which he would print every Christmas.
Right. Right.
Deck us all with Boston Charlie.
We've got Porcupine, who is the Porcupine who is...
He's your Eeyore type character.
Yeah, he's Pogo's friend. He's very grumpy. He's not depressed like Eeyore. He's grumpy. His thing is he messes up jokes. He tries to retell jokes and can't tell them right. He just completely misinterprets the punchlines. There's the lady. There's a couple ladies. There's Hepzibah, the skunk. She's the French skunk.
She's a sexy skunk.
A bit like the Pepe Le Pew cat that gets turned into a skunk, I guess.
Yeah, it's a bit like that. Yes, she's always getting a stripe of paint, and Pepe Le Pew's always crushing on her.
But she's an actual skunk.
Sexually assaulting her.
Yes, that's right.
Apparently based on his second wife.
Oh, right. Okay. Hepzibah was.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. Okay. And Ms. Beaver, who's kind of she's like a washerwoman or something, I guess. Any other characters we need to point out? That's kind of the main...
Well, there's the Deacon, who you've already mentioned, Deacon Muskrat.
Oh, that's right.
Who's a vaguely sinister figure, sort of serves as the antagonist.
Yes. And there's like Seminole Sam, who's a fox, who's always... There's a lot of hucksters and con artists that some of them show up and come and go.
Yes.
Now we get to some of the important, like, comers and goers. There's Mole Macaroni, who later becomes known as Molester.
Yes.
But sounds like Polster, but is spelled molester.
It's hilarious. Every time you see a reference to Molster Mole, it says, pronounced like Polster.
Yes. Yes. But he's like this...
How would that have come across in a strip?
Couldn't have. Well, there may be the first time he's introduced
he
as
said
Molster.
It sounds like Polster.
Sounds like Polster. He might have said it out loud.
In his first appearance, which we read, he's apparently based loosely on a real life politician.
Yeah.
Patrick McCarran.
Okay.
Who was a notorious xenophobe.
Yeah.
And anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Who was involved in a very familiar rhetoric to us today of anti-immigration.
Yeah.
And he passed some kind of sort of very restrictive anti-immigration laws. So, hilariously, he can't see, because he's a mole, so he's always banging into things. He's always mistaking people for something else. He's always trying to figure out if they're immigrants or not. And best of all, he sanitizes everything.
Yes. Yeah, he sprays them with the sanitizer, yeah.
He says, we must make the air safe for our native nostrils.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and he, the main plot line here in the 1953 plot is he's trying to get rid of migratory birds.
Yes.
I
love it. It's just so funny. I love that. So they have a bird watching club.
Yeah.
That Deacon and Mole start, I think.
Yes,
so
that's
that they
right.
Can find the birds, and they're always wandering around mistaking people for birds.
Yes, and if they have a book. At one stage, they have this book that lists all the birds, and like turtles and stuff are coming up to them, and alligators, Albert the alligator, and they're like, "Oh, you're a bird," and he's like, "No, I'm not." And they look in the book, and he's not listed in the book, so they burn the book. And there's a line where he says, "There's nothing quite so lovely as a brightly burning book." That's the punchline of one of the scenes where they're burning this book, this bird watching book, because it doesn't agree with who they believe are actually birds.
Yes. It gets even better.
It gets even better because then we get Simple J Malarkey shows up.
This is probably the most famous character ever to appear in Pogo.
Yes, definitely. So at this stage they bring him in because it had something to do with the birds. They were having trouble identifying the birds because everybody was denying that they were birds.
So they need an expert bird spotter.
Right. So they brought in this guy. He's actually the cousin of this character named Wile E. Cat.
Yeah, who had already appeared.
Who had already appeared. He's almost the same, except maybe his face is a little bit different.
Well, his face is a little bit different because it looks like a certain famous figure from American history.
Yeah, it looks like McCarthy.
Joseph McCarthy.
So
Simple J Malarkey he's Joseph McCarthy. And this is at the height of the Red Scare and McCarthyism.
Yeah. And then Malarkey shows up. Apparently some newspapers redrew his face.
Yes.
took out the stubble so he looked less like McCarthy.
Yes, they did. They did.
So he shows up, and they've decided the way they're going to solve this problem of people who are denying their birds is to literally tar and feather them. Literally put them in a vat of tar and put feathers on them, so they can be identified as birds, and then they can be expelled. It's astonishing.
It really is. Tarring and feathering, just like McCarthy was doing as part of the House of Un-American Activities. This is at a time when it was, if you criticised McCarthy at this time, you could ruin your career.
Yeah.
You were accused of being a communist because McCarthy would say, I'm fighting communism, so if you're criticising me, you're supporting communists. And it was dangerous to criticise him at this time. And yet, Walt Kelly's doing it.
Yeah, he's doing it. Now, there's a bit of build-up to here, because in 52, we'd had a plot line where Pogo ran for president. Not by his own choice.
Yes.
The other swamp critters put him up to it in some strange way. Happens again in 56. I read some of the 56 run. What happens in the 56 run is this family has decided to squat in Pogo's house for some reason. I can't remember why. Pogo thinks there's ghosts in his house. And one of the babies of this family is sleeping in his laundry basket. So he puts a stick through the laundry window to poke at the basket. And then he hears a cry and he runs in terror. But he's caught like some shorts on his stick that he'd used. So he's running with these piece of clothing on the stick. And somebody had seen this, and they say they saw Pogo in a political parade, waving a flag.
Yeah.
And then somebody else says, or the same character says, he was running. And then they say, Pogo's running for president.
There's always
That's what it turns into. And then it turns this very long plot line where they're trying to get him... The rest of the critters in the swamp are trying to get him elected. He has no interest. He's just fishing. They come up and they tell him about all the things that are going on. He's like, he doesn't care. He's just fishing. That's all he cares about. At the very end, Khrushchev shows up as a pig.
Yeah.
And says, what are you doing? In our country, we only have one candidate, and he gets 95% of the votes. And he tries to convince them to whittle themselves down to one candidate. Everybody's trying to get Pogo to win. But anyway, finally they get a newspaper, and it turns out that it was actually, the actual... actually, they turn up with a newspaper from like 40 years before. And they say that's the winner because these strips were being drawn, I think, 6 to 8 weeks in advance of actual events. Yep. So he didn't know who the winner was on the day that it dropped. But in 52, this I Go Pogo, which was the I Like Ike version in the comic strip, became this kind of real-world thing, a bit like the Howard the Duck for President buttons that people were wearing around, especially university students.
Yes. And university students, unsurprisingly, really love this comic.
Yep. And Harvard, there was this big I Go Pogo campaign at Harvard. Apparently it turned into a riot.
Yeah. I read about that. It wasn't really... It looks like... I found an article online about it. And it looks like it was the local cops wanted to beat up on the Harvard students, essentially, and this was an excuse.
Right.
All of the charges got tossed out eventually.
Right. Okay.
They were just grabbing people that were walking by. Are you part of this Pogo thing?
Yeah.
No, I'm just going home.
Right. Okay, makes sense.
But but it'd be notorious, and in fact, that class. When they had the class reunion, the mascot for the class reunion was Pogo.
Okay.
So it's just entered folklore. The Harvard Pogo riot.
Yes. Right. Okay, now, we've kind of torn through it, but it's really hard to describe, another thing is the continuity of this from day to day. I mean, it's hard to get into in the middle of it, because the storylines run very long, for months.
Yes, there'll be about... There's one where we first started reading where they've got a get rich... Churchill FM and the Owl have got a get rich quick scheme, I think.
Yes.
On the Alligator too, they want to sell dirt.
Oh, yes. They're trying to sell... First, they want to sell water.
Yep.
Because they say that housewives who use soap, they need water.
Yep.
So this Seminole Sam shows up with this scam where he said he's bought Niagara Falls and he's going to move it to the swamp. And then they're like, well, before they need the water and the stuff, they're going to need dirt. So there's this long storyline where they're trying to package dirt.
Yep.
That turns into, well, now we got to advertise the dirt. So they set up a TV station, which is just, somebody standing behind a dresser with the mirror knocked out.
Removed, and you stand behind it, and that's the TV. It's funny.
And then I think at that point, Deacon comes in and tries to take over the station because he thinks it's worth a lot of money or something. I can't remember. But this kind of eases itself into the bird watching plot in some way because they're trying to get. I can't remember how it all plays out, but
It's
these
very,
are long,
very tangled, and it just keeps.
Tangled.
It's just foibles upon foibles.
Yeah.
Things just getting more and more ridiculous because some of the other characters are desperate to find out what the secret ingredient is in what they're selling.
Yes.
And they'll ask someone and they'll say, it's dirt. It's like, oh, damn, we've been tricked again. And then they'll be eating it.
Yeah.
And then they offer to sell the dirt to the alligator, and they tell him they'll knock off a penny a box. So if he buys 1 million, he'll be $10,000 ahead.
Yes.
At which point he decides that
he has $10,000.
He's rich.
Yes.
But everyone else in the swamp starts believing it too. He's the richest man in the swamp.
Yeah.
Because he's $10,000 ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
He hasn't even bought the boxes.
Yeah.
It's like PG Wodehouse or something.
Yeah.
It just piles on top. It just keeps piling and piling and piling on. And it goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it never really ends. It just goes on to the next thing.
Yeah, if you jump in at any point, you don't have any idea how they got there. What the situation. There's kind of tries to sneak in a bit of recap at the start, in a sense, to give you a sense of where yesterday's episode was, but it's not nearly enough to get you completely where you're going.
But to return to Simple J. Malarkey, the McCarthy XP, it's quite funny. So they bring him in to spot birds, but then he promptly usurps control of the club.
Yes.
With a shotgun.
That's right, yeah.
And he's got all this patter about how he's got all the votes because they're right here and it's the shotgun.
Yeah.
The deacon tries to table an objection or something with some paperwork that shows that he's the head, and Malarkey just blows a hole in it.
Yeah.
With a shotgun, and the deacon says, "Objection sustained."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he renames it to the Bonfire Club.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
to make explicit that connection with book burning and apparently the KKK.
Oh yeah, because later on. Well, a few times he did some in his Pogo books. There were separate books, and he did an anti-KKK story in one of those. But in this one, later on, Malarkey comes back to the swamp.
This is amazing.
Yeah,
is it right if I tell this?
Yeah, go for it.
So now I have to talk about how this comic was censored.
Okay.
So because it was so satirical, this one ruffled feathers. This comic, right? So
that's almost a line from Pogo.
So. It was frequently butting up against censorship because of this heavy satire. So newspapers, as you said, would move the strip to the editorial pages during controversial stories. They would edit or alter them, or there's a third way they would try to censor it, which is to threaten to drop the strip. As you said, one California paper had its art department remove Malarkey's 5 o'clock shadow, and Kelly said. In a book that he published in 1959 about Pogo, he said, "That poor Malarkey, still known to be who he was, appeared as a deformed, chinless bit of ugliness that I would not have dreamed of likening to a strong man of the Senate." Walt Kelly is very witty.
Yeah.
Then, as you said, he shows up again a year later after his initial appearance in 1954. And the editor of the Providence Bulletin from Rhode Island threatened to drop the strip and apparently he said, if the face of Malarkey or of Indian Charlie, who was a character based on Richard Nixon, appear again, we will drop the strip. So, Kelly already had a character in the strip which was a chicken, which was a Rhode Island Red.
Yeah.
Just like an anti-communist chicken, and she was really angry whenever someone said she was a Rhode Island Red, which is a real breed of chicken.
Right.
And of course, Providence is in Rhode Island.
Yes, right.
Malarkey sees the chicken and says, "Nobody from Providence should see me."
Yeah.
And then he pulls an empty bait bag over his head.
Yeah. So he's walking around with a hood for a couple of strips.
Yeah. Which is just genius.
Yeah.
And apparently, so he said in this book that he published in 1959, which was called 10 Ever-Lovin' Blue-Eyed Years with Pogo. This is Walt Kelly. It was easy to have them put KKK types of garb on. So explicitly saying that this bait bag is meant to make him look like the KKK, which identified their kind a little more and yet live up to the letter of this latest law, which is that their faces mustn't appear. Apparently, the Providence paper took the L, as they say, and they wrote in their editorial, "Now we find we are being kidded. We recommend to you the Pogo strip for today, which for the time being will appear on the editorial page." So they didn't drop it.
Right.
They apparently saw the joke. Saw the humour in it. Walt Kelly said, "If you can't win, don't join them. Learn how to lose. A cheer for the Providence Bulletin."
Right. Did you find in your research about the A and B strips?
Yes, I did. That came a little later.
Later on, yeah.
Yes. During sort of like I think the Lyndon Johnson's elections later on in the 70s.
Okay.
He would draw 2 strips for the same day when he was going to do something particularly...
If he thought it might be controversial.
If he thought it might piss someone off.
Yeah, right.
He did that for a few years. He would write a satirical one and a tamer one, which he would call the Bunny Rabbit.
Or Happy Bunny or something like that? Bunny Rabbit strips? Okay. Yeah,
Bunny Rabbit strips. He did that for a while, but eventually gave it up because it was too much work.
Right. But they would have a letter A after the date, I think. Like the date in the regular strip would be like 21-6 or whatever, or 6/21.
And if it was a Bunny Rabbit strip, it would have an A. That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Although Pogo was also censored for the reverse, so being too anti-communist. That's specifically with the Khrushchev pig.
Yeah, but that's like in other countries,
that's right. Not within America, of course.
Japan and I think Canada, I saw for some reason.
That's right.
Was like, we don't like these anti-Khrushchev strips.
It was the Toronto Globe and Mail.
Okay.
And the Asahi Evening News, the English language paper in Tokyo.
Right.
Of the Asahi Evening News, Kelly said, "I understand they are so close to Vladivostok." But yes, that was the Khrushchev pig. They didn't like critiquing a head of state.
Interesting. Okay, is there anything else we need to... I mean, we've barreled through Pogo in 25 minutes here, but is there anything else we really need to say about it? It was actually... So, despite all the political stuff in there, it's actually mostly kind of vaudeville slapstick.
Yeah.
And wordplay.
Yes.
For the most part.
It's definitely... Yeah. It's not enormously... That's right, it's not every single strip that will have this satire in it. It's mostly these shenanigans that are occurring.
Yes.
But when it does, boy... This is a time when the editors of the paper didn't even know what to do with...
Apparently they wouldn't notice until like a few days later or a few weeks into the strip that something was happening as well. Like they weren't really reading it.
That's true.
Yeah.
People would... Yeah, that's right. Because this just didn't happen at this point in time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right,
Walt Kelly just sort of was the first person to critique current events.
Yeah, this is well pre-Doonesbury, I think, which didn't start until the mid-70s.
Oh, speaking of Doonesbury and other comics of that sort, Walt Kelly's enormously influential on these kinds of people. Everyone from Calvin and Hobbes, which we've discussed in previous weeks, to, as you said, Doonesbury, to the writers of the Asterix comics, Goscinny and Uderzo.
Yeah.
Reading Asterix looks like Pogo.
Yeah.
And, of course, Asterix, those of you who have read it, will remember that they would frequently use different lettering for different characters, including Gothic font for the Goths.
Right.
And I read that they were directly inspired by Kelly's lettering for the Deacon.
How interesting.
To do that.
Okay.
Incidentally, it's now a good time to mention that the Deacon in the film is Vincent Price.
Yes. Yeah.
If you had to cast a single person...
He speaks in a Gothic font.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Genius bit of casting there. Yeah, for sure.
Genius. What else? Pogo is the strip. One other thing that Pogo is famous for, aside from the character of Malarkey, is the expression, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Yes. That was drawn for a Earth Day poster in 71 and then appeared in a comic strip afterwards. I think in a Earth Day special comic.
Yes. Your dates, you're almost correct.
Okay.
It was the Earth Day poster in 1970.
Okay.
And then in the special strip in 1971.
So, the special was 71, yeah.
Both for Earth Day.
And it's him looking at a field, like a forest that's just covered in human garbage.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Yes.
So this is a reference to a famous bellicose statement from the War of 1812, when the United States Navy defeated the British Navy at the Battle of Lake Erie. The commander of the fleet is supposed to have written to a general, "We have met the enemy and they are ours."
Right.
So meaning we have come and conquered.
Yes.
As I read online here, I'm just going to quote this. Kelly's parody of this famous battle report perfectly summarises mankind's tendency to create our own problems. In this case, we have only ourselves to blame for the pollution and destruction of our environment. So in the later years, shortly, I think he passed away in 1973, so this was kind of his favourite topic to return to from 1970 until his death.
Right.
So sort of environmental themes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to this movie, which is an odd one.
This movie, yeah.
Directed by a fellow named Marc Paul Chinoy.
Yes.
As far as I can tell, he did segments for like Sesame Street and stuff. Maybe that's how he connected with Skip Hinnant, who is also doing Electric Company stuff. I don't know.
I also don't know. I mean, the company that made this, which was called
Stomar Enterprises?
I've got 20... Oh, no, yeah, all right. Yeah, Stomar Enterprises, that's right. Washington, D.C.-based production company that mostly made educational films and industrial films.
And were based in a shopping mall?
Yeah. So that documentary we watched, they were in the shopping mall, that we watched a short documentary about the production of this film, which the amount of work that went into this movie...
Oh, yeah. There's a bit in that little 7-minute news segment, that documentary, where the one guy is building miniatures.
Yes.
So this is all stop motion.
Yes. So they
built this miniature of a pinball machine, and he spent a month on it. It's it's got working lights and stuff.
Yeah.
And he spent a month on this awesome little piece of equipment that you would love to have, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. So, as you said, this is filmed in what I think is called claymation.
Yeah.
So that term didn't exist at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that came about more in the 90s, the word claymation, but it's what we would think of as being claymation.
Okay.
So reading newspaper articles and reports from the time, they variously call it flexiform.
Yeah, flexiform was whatever new technique they came up for moving them around, right?
Yes, and replacement animation is another. So they didn't, and obviously stop motion, because ultimately it is stop motion. But yes, we look at it and this is claymation.
Yes.
It looks really good.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
It looks fantastic. So, all right, how to describe what happens in the film?
Okay, so it starts with Pogo fishing.
Yes. We have a sort of a voiceover.
Yes, there's a little bit of narration, which tells us about Okefenokee Swamp, etc.
That apparently wasn't in the original release.
Yes.
That was added for when it was released on cable. But we will get into the story of this film's tortuous journey to YouTube.
Yes. 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 Now, suddenly, Albert and one other character, I can't remember who, barge in on Pogo swimming.
I think it's the owl.
Yes, okay, must be Howland Owl.
Howland Owl, that's it.
And they say, we want you to run for president.
Yeah.
This is 1980, okay? So it's an election year, much like 52 and 56 when in the comic strips we had the presidential storylines.
So people would have been familiar with the idea of Pogo running, even though it's almost 30 years later.
Yes, and the strip is no longer in newspapers.
That's correct. It hasn't been in since 1976, I think, is when it finished.
Yeah. So they come in and they're like, we want you to run for president. Okay, and he's like, I'm not interested, whatever. I think he was not interested. Then we cut to Seminole Sam. Was it Seminole Sam? No, it was Deacon and Molster.
Yep.
Molster Mole. Yep. They're in a shadowy cave. They're in Mole's house, I guess, underground.
Must be Mole's place.
And they're plotting. They're plotting, how can we run this election? They said, we need a patsy that we can run. And they also decide that, I think they want somebody who's like too good-hearted.
Yeah, there's all sorts of funny... much like the strip.
Yeah.
There's so much dialogue.
Yes.
So much dialogue.
Yes.
It's constant, and they're always saying all of these funny little...
Yeah, and I didn't even write...
one-liners. I wrote a few of them down, you know. It's very familiar kind of satirical statements, you know. They need a candidate. They want the patsy. They say someone who's both appealing and hopelessly stupid.
Yes. And they say nobody wants an honest president.
No.
Was that Albert that said that, or I can't remember, but anybody.
Molster Mole says when they want their own candidate who's going to be crooked as hell but appealing, and they want an alternative candidate who will definitely lose. And they hit on Pogo for that.
Yes.
And the Molster Mole says, show me a candidate that is honest, open-minded, and never makes a false promise, and I'll show you a born loser.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's full of stuff like that.
Full of stuff like that. I'm really wondering if any kids would be enjoying this stuff. I think the claymation and then this constant cartoon music, which was driving me crazy.
Yeah, the cartoon music I didn't really like.
And they have more sound effects and stuff. I'm like, okay, this is for 3-year-olds. But then there's these very talky scenes like this one with stuff that's just going to fly right over the heads and quite long.
Yeah.
Strange moment. But I did feel like, shouldn't this scene come first?
Yeah.
Because shouldn't they be deciding that Pogo should be president first, and then Albert runs to Pogo in the swamp and says, we want you to be president, because they put the idea in his head? It feels like something's out of order and missing here. I feel like maybe it got moved because they thought kids aren't going to want to see this mole cave scene first.
It could be that the original cut had that scene first.
I did suspect that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so anyway... so now we get basically a lot of hijinks for 85 minutes, as there are all these plots to get Pogo to be president. Pogo's hardly in it, which is very like the strip. You hardly ever see him where everybody's talking about getting him to be president. There's a lot of lines and gags that come straight out of the strips.
Yes. Apparently, because it was directed, written, and produced by this guy, Marc Chinoy.
Yeah.
He relied on the strips very heavily.
Yes.
In fact, there was a statement I read in something published in the Washington Post at the time. He said there's nothing in the film that isn't in a strip.
Yes. But there's a kind of... Some of it's a bit watered down. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a gag where somebody gets hit on the head. It comes straight out of the comic. And then they talk about he's having visions. And then they say, oh, you're the new Joan of Arc or something to save France. Now, that same joke is in the movie, but in a much more digestible form, I guess, because you're not able to stare at the words for a minute and try to figure out what people are talking about. When they're talking about the Maid of Orleans. I think in the comic he's like, you're like the Maid of Orleans, and then it's Joan of Arc, and you got to go through all these steps before you get to the gag. There's a lot of stuff like that. And the other thing that really struck me about it is the comic is like a Disney cartoon or a Warner Brothers. It's like a Chuck Jones cartoon. It moves really fast. These characters are moving their arms and legs. Yep. They're running around here and there, doing all sorts of stuff. And this is strangely slower.
Yeah.
It moves a lot slower because they're having to move 24 frames, 24 jet moves of this plasticine in order to get this character to move his arm up and down or whatever. And it's taken them like a day to shoot 50 seconds or something like that. It's madness, but it moves at this weirdly slow pace but then there's a lot of like pratfalls. Like there's just like people falling down for no reason.
There are a lot of pratfalls. A lot of physical comedy.
Yeah, I mean, at one point Albert walks into a tree because he's not paying attention. When he decides that, Pogo's going to be president, I have to go over to his house and he has to make me Secretary of State or whatever, he bumps a tree. That's right out of the comic. And here he does the same thing. He's going over to Pogo's house and then he walks into a tree. Yeah. Weirdly, it's not as animated as it was in the comic strip. I don't know quite what's going on here. It's something about the plasticine, which, as we said, is so gorgeous to look at, and the models look great. They look like these characters.
They look incredible.
If I'd watched this at 5-6 years old, this would have been my favorite movie. Yep. To this day, it would be. I'd be like, remember that Pogo movie? Yeah. With the awesome little characters. It does look fantastic.
I mean, I suppose it's because you're right, it does feel, even though they're moving all the time, and the movement is so fluid and natural looking, it looks way better than, like traditional kind of like animation with drawings. But I suppose because the framing for the shots has to be so small.
Yes, that's part of the problem. You never get any like distance.
We can't pull back. Yeah.
It's a very small window that you're looking into.
So when action happens, it has to happen within a very confined space. Or has to cut away to another confined space.
Yeah,
I think I think that does have an effect. I mean, if people just visualize a claymation movie now, I think you can sort of see what passes for action in something like Wallace and Gromit, or something like that. it has a certain energy, but it's also constricted.
I don't think it's fair because the Wallace and Gromit movies are really state of the art, and they do big, especially the movie versions. They do huge set pieces where they can pull back as far as they want. Here, you can see online they made these. I watched it on YouTube. They made these ViewMaster reels of this movie, and it's perfect because they look like the movie looks like ViewMaster reels. It looks like you're looking through this 3D tiny little scene. Somebody's built the scene out of plasticine and taken a picture of it. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, because that's exactly what happened.
Yes, but it's weirdly constrained, and I mean, part of it is Kelly's. He'll back up and he'll give you a tiny panel, but he'll back way up and you'll get these silhouettes, like beautiful sunset silhouettes of the characters or something like that. And they don't have that. They try. It opens with the silhouettes walking by, but there's a strange limitation.
There was only so much that they could do.
Yeah.
At the time and with the materials.
Yeah. So another thing so Owl, there's a bit here which I didn't remember from the comics. It might have been in 52. Owl prints up a newspaper announcing that Pogo has won before the election has even happened. I thought this was a great little bit.
Yep.
There's a line which actually plays out longer in the 56 election storyline, where when Pogo decides to run, and then Albert's like, well, I'm going to be Secretary of State, and then, Albert says that, and then Owl comes up, he says, well, I'm going to be Vice President. So Owl goes to Seminole Sam. He says, Pogo's running for president, and I'm for vice. And then Seminole Sam cuts him off, and he's like, okay, so the party's for vice. And this becomes a running storyline over like a couple of weeks, where it's like Pogo's party is the vice party. They're for vice. This is great. We can win this election. That's only like one line in here. Yeah. Where he says that line about who's for vice or whatever.
It can't spend the time on.
No.
It's similar. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this stuff is stuff that's in the comics, in the strips, but they can't stay with it for weeks.
Yes.
It has to go on to the next thing.
Yeah. You can just have one line.
It's very busy. It's absolute cracking pace.
And then there's songs in it.
Yeah,
there's songs in the comic, but not like this. This is like songs in a kid's movie, like in a kid's cartoon.
Yeah. Like a musical almost.
Yeah. So, meanwhile, our bad guys, our villains, Deacon and... Who
Mole. Mole.
Deacon and Mole. I keep forgetting it was Mole. Mole's the one that's always manipulating stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. They recruit a second candidate to run against Pogo, and that's going to be this little kid.
It's hilarious. It's
Bug, an insect named Fremont.
Yeah.
Or Fremont, and he just says, just fine.
Just fine.
Just fine. Just fine. He sounds like a South Park character, a bit like, who's the one with the high-pitched voice? Anyway, he's a funny little character.
Yeah.
I guess they want him to lose against Pogo.
No. He's their candidate, the one they want to win.
Oh.
He's the empty vessel.
Right. Okay.
That they're going to manipulate.
That's right.
Appealing and hopelessly stupid. And he's great because his mum's trained him to just say, just fine to everything.
Yes. No matter what. Yes. So, meanwhile, Pogo's just fishing. The name of the fishing boat changes in every shot, which is how it worked in the comics as well. I did like that little nod to it.
Yes.
I don't know what the audience would think of it. They would be like, what's going on with the fishing boat name? Anyway, there's a bit of a gag with the war chest, which is straight out of the 56 storyline. So they decide they need money to run the campaign, right?
Yep.
And I think Owl looks in the war chest and he's like, we're $500,000 short. And Albert assumes that means they're rich.
Yeah.
And one of the other characters...
They've got $500,000.
...thinks that they've had $500,000 stolen. This turns into a fist fight between Albert and this other character. And that's straight out of the comics as well. So they decide they need to hold a carnival to raise money. We've seen this have a carnival to raise money in several movies on this podcast.
Indeed. Fatty Finn.
Yes.
The kids...
Skippy.
Skippy. Yep.
Yeah. It keeps happening. This one has a pretty good scene, which I didn't remember from the comics, where they have a Wheel of Fortune where you can place your bets and win Senate, like Supreme Court seats and stuff, or like the prizes if you win. I thought that was really good.
There's a lot of good jokes in this movie.
Yes.
It's just the pace of it, though.
Yeah.
You can't look away from the screen for a second.
No, I was trying to take notes and then I had to rewind every time I wrote something down. Mole and Deacon show up in disguise at this carnival, which is a thing they tried to do in the comics from time to time. They show up in very bad disguises.
Yep.
This is the first time we meet Lady Hepzibah. Mademoiselle Hepzibah, they tried to convince her to start a kissing booth.
Yes.
She's highly offended by this, happens in the comics all the time too, that somebody's trying to kiss her or
always trying to kiss her. That's how the volume that we read started off.
Yes, that's right.
People were giving, who was it? Was it the...
Oh, cute. It was for...
It was the owl.
It was New Year's resolutions. They were basically going around giving people resolutions and then
they would do
fulfilling the resolutions. Say like, you give up chocolate. So
we'll eat the chocolate for you.
We'll eat the chocolate for you. So they... Yeah.
So So they... And is it Porcupine? He says he's going to give up kissing...
Well, Hepzibah approaches them. She approaches them and says, "You need to get this guy to stop kissing me. Can you give him the resolution to do that?" And it turns this big thing where, I can't even describe it. It's craziness that happens where he's kissing everybody that appears at his door. They start attacking each other because they think they're being tricked, etc., etc. It goes back and forth.
The kissing noise in the comic is great too. It's smear.
Yes, yes. So they raise some money from... Oh, the carnival, actually, P.T. Bridgeport shows up. Bridgeport, by the way, was the name of a newspaper that Kelly worked at. He's the big bear character. Yep. He shows up. So he is running this carnival, and then it's destroyed through some hijinks. Everything's wrecked. He's like, well, here's for my fee and expenses. He takes all the money that they raise.
Which I think he always planned to do.
Yes, absolutely. And
we have a scene where he bilks some children... out of money.
Yes.
And again, it's a really great scene.
Yeah.
And he just has this patter running the whole time. Everyone's a winner. Come on. And then at the end, without breaking stride, without drawing breath, he goes, "Another day, I fooled these silly bastards."
Yes. Yes, the word bastards was in this movie, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally they do manage to get some money from somewhere. I can't remember where.
They start shaking people down. Literally, they pick them up and shake them.
Oh, that's right. But then it gets muddy.
They call it canvassing.
Yes.
So because they have a piece of canvas that they put on the ground, and then they shake.
That is very
the residents.
Pogo.
Yeah.
I think to say we're canvassing and actually have canvas.
Yeah.
And then it gets muddy, so Miss Beaver has to launder it. And they have to. It's a slush fund because they're slushing it around in the water.
I remember that. That was odd. And he eats a slush fund. So the origin of the word slush fund comes from the British Navy, where the cook was allowed to sell the fat or the slush from the top of the cook pot as their own private, as a way to make money aside from their wage.
Okay.
So I think it wouldn't... I mean, that's something that Walt Kelly would definitely have known and referred to in a strip.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder if it came from a strip originally, and that's...
Oh, yeah. It might have, yeah. But the laundering... Again, this is another thing. There's like no kid... I don't know, kids are looking at the pretty pictures.
Well, it's just funny, like they're washing the money. You can't wash money. Yeah. You can't wash American money because it disintegrates. It's made of paper.
Yeah.
So, and that of course that's not what happens though. Instead it shrinks.
Yes.
It shrinks in the wash. So they've laundered the money and it shrinks in the wash. A kid would love that.
Yeah.
And us as adults are like, haha.
Yeah. Yes. Now we have Porcupine is left alone in the swamp for some reason because Pogo runs off, and now he has to sing a song about being lonely.
Yeah.
In the swamp, and not, okay, you're going to put a song in your kid's movie, okay, but why does it have to be a song about being all alone?
Yeah. This is why I said he was kind of like Eeyore. He's much more melancholy in the film than he is kind of like prickly and cantankerous than he is in the comic.
Yes.
And he has so much dialogue. Like, I think we're supposed to be amused because he's just got this running kind of like depressed or grumpy commentary on what's happening. Or... they're fishing. There's a fishing scene early on that's completely self-contained.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the Pogo running for president plot.
Yeah.
It's just a really long fishing sequence where Porcupine just doesn't shut up the whole way through. And then he has a fancy new fishing rod. And if he presses buttons and winds it the right way, it does tricks. And it yanks them across the pond and they crash. And that's the scene. It's like, this scene didn't need to be in the film.
Yeah.
You didn't need to spend probably hundreds and hundreds of hours animating it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so now it's time for the convention. By the way, I want to say we were like, oh, what are we going to do next? And I was like, okay, maybe we should do Pogo this week. I'm really glad we did it now. It's like the right time.
Right.
2024 is a good year to be doing this movie.
When you think, I agree. And that's what the director and the producer wanted They wanted this film to become the election year film.
It was supposed to come out 3 months before the election, right?
Their best hopes for it was that it would be shown. It would become sort of like Home Alone in Poland.
Yeah.
It would just be shown every year.
Yeah.
Not like every 4 years.
Yeah.
As a great way to kind of remind people about the political process, about how dodgy it is, remind you to get out the vote.
Yeah.
Because it's all very timeless. So much of the...
No, I did write down one line specifically. So this is when they're still Albert's trying to convince Pogo to run. Pogo doesn't want to run. And he says that I'm not running. They can't vote for a candidate that's not running or something like that.
Yeah.
Albert says maybe that's what they've been waiting for. A candidate they don't have, so they don't have to vote for someone. So they don't have to vote for someone. They don't have to vote for someone they wouldn't have voted for anyway, I think is the line, which I've mangled 3 times trying to get through it, but it was pretty good. So yeah, they're on their way to the convention. There's another song here. It's about the convention. This one's a bit better.
Vote none of the above.
Vote none of the above. There's a bit of a montage here of stuff. Some of it's very dumb, like kids falling over for no reason, as I mentioned before. But now Mole and Deacon come up with a kidnapping plot.
Yep.
They're going to kidnap Pogo.
Yeah, because their candidate's doing poorly. He's got drunk or something?
Oh, no, he fell into the slush fund.
Right.
He fell into the slush, and when he came out, he could speak normally. And this screwed up all their plans to have an absolute dum-dum of a candidate, because he actually has opinions and feelings about things.
So that's bad. So they know they're doing badly against Pogo, so they need to do something. They need to put a stop to him. So they go to see Wile E. Cat.
Yes, in the swamp. And he is his handler, or his henchman is Seminole Sam.
Yep.
The way this story is laid out. So when they get to the swamp, they're looking for Cat, and Seminole Sam is like, well, I'm his, what does he say? I can't remember what word he uses, but he emphasizes fee. The key word is fee in there. So he wants to get paid to let them through to see the Cat. But this backfires on them. They do get to see a Cat, but the Cat is like this out-of-control gun nut, basically, with the shotgun.
It's twice as big as everybody else.
Yeah. He's showing up, he doesn't care. He's a bit like the Malarkey character.
He takes charge.
Over. He takes charge.
Yeah, they just wanted him to kidnap, but he's gonna kill Pogo.
Yeah.
Essentially, eliminate him.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's a plot to get Pogo married off, because every candidate has to be married. No kids is forgivable, but he has to at least be married. So they're trying to get him married off to Lady Mademoiselle Hepzibah. That plot's going on. There's a bit of talk about birth control in here, some gags.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, it's definitely... I didn't write down the whole sequence, but there was like, what's your position on birth control? And somebody says there's 2 sides. He says, well, people aren't alive, don't have a side, so there's only one side or something. I can't remember. It goes on... I was surprised by it. It's in there. Again, I'm not surprised you missed it, because you can miss a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the moments when I looked away.
Looked away to write something down, yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then...
they need to get to the convention. There's car chases.
Yes.
So there's more than one car sequence. There's at least 3, I think. No, 2.
2 that I remember.
Where the car's out of control.
Yeah.
I mean... This is so they can animate it.
Yeah.
I mean, so in the first case, they're missing a wheel on the car. So the alligator takes the steering wheel off, and then of course they can't steal the car. And then it turns out the car has no petrol, and then it turns out the car has no engine.
Yeah. And then
so they just end up pushing it into the swamp.
Yes.
Where it sinks
or crashes into the swamp. Yes.
And meanwhile, Pogo is in a suitcase.
Yeah, accidentally got stuffed into a suitcase.
Is another funny, very kind of Pogo-esque, comic-esque sequence where they're so busy, they decide Pogo's absconded. He's gone missing. They need to find him. They need to find him so they can get him to the convention or something.
Yeah.
And Pogo just wanders in.
Yes.
And says, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And they're like, "We don't have time to talk to you. We're busy.
Yeah.
Looking for Pogo."
Yeah.
Just stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's non-stop.
Yeah, then they have the big car chase. I think everybody ends up...
They buy...
I think the bad guys end up in the swamp, basically, and that's the end of them. Like, they get overturned, capsized into the mud.
They got a beautiful taxi kind of
Yes! They buy the taxi for... They say, how much is the taxi? He says $20 a day, and he says, I'll buy it for 99 cents. Taxi driver's like, hey, that's a good deal. And the taxi guy laughed at that bit for some... I liked how dumb the taxi driver was for some reason.
Yeah.
But then how did it end? I'm trying to remember how they...
Well, Pogo has a big rant about how he won't be...
Yes,
the
an
candidate.
important speech, yeah.
He has one of those long, punny, kind of fractured speeches that are very typical of the comic. Is I positively ain't running. I ain't even walking.
Yes.
You know, just stuff like that. Goes on for a while. He steps in a pie.
Yes, it falls off the table, I think, after he steps in the pie.
All the food goes in the air.
Yeah.
It's just, the film just kind of peters out at that point.
Right.
Just sort of ends. Well, I mean, I think they find out that the election's over and that someone else was already elected.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, a lot going on there. Should we do our trivia?
Yep, let's do it quickly. Alright, so there's so much trivia.
Okay, interesting.
Well, I say so much trivia. Okay, so this film cost $2 million, $1979 to make, which sounds expensive, but not really for a feature-length film that's all kind of painstakingly...
Yeah.
So it took a year to make. And as you say, they were working in that shopping mall, that department store, or whatever, in those rooms at the back of a mall. And as I said, we saw footage and the amount of work. So they're showing us, he's working on these beautiful models. He showed us some of the tools that they use, you know, like a scalpel, like a toothpick to smooth out lines.
And a brush for texture on the back of fur or clothing or something.
Amazing. So that pinball machine, in my notes, I've got 2 months.
Right, 2 months,
to make,
okay.
and it just appears in a short sequence.
A couple of seconds on screen?
Yeah. One of the model makers says that a model takes 5 to 8 hours to make. So it's like a day's work, really.
Yeah.
And lasts for 4 to 10 seconds of film.
Yeah.
So they're making, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of these models.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
Really.
Wild.
And which leads, you know, so a lot of work, a lot of love, a lot of heart and soul got poured into this film, which makes what happened to it really depressing.
Yeah.
Which is that they got screwed by their distributor. This distributor was 21st Century Communications.
Okay.
And what happened was they did not... It was supposed to have a theatrical release ahead of the election. And what happens is that it didn't have a theatrical release.
I heard some scuttlebutt that a couple of theaters might have gone.
It did end up showing in theaters, but after this... I read that too, but it was after the election.
Okay.
Sort of after the time when it was meant to happen.
Okay.
What happened was, instead of showing it in pictures, this distributor distributed it on VHS through something called Photomax.
Okay.
So Photomax were...
So Photomat?
Photomat?
Yeah, Photomat.
Photomat.
Yeah.
So Photomat stores were like drive-through...
Photo developing places?
Film places. I think...
But did they have rental kiosks or something like that?
Yes, they did. They were also one of the first places you could rent VHS tapes. So this is... Of course, this is like 1970... They started doing it in 1979, I think, and then only did it until about 1981 or 82.
Okay.
But, you know, and it was just what you'd expect at the time. You had a catalogue that you had at home with the list of films that were available at the Photomat booth.
Okay.
And you then ticked the one you want, called the Photomat place, and it would take them a day to get the tape, and then you drove in and picked it up a day later. Wow.
Okay. So they thought they were going to make their $2 million back through this system? That's insane. Well, I don't know how popular the system was, but...
It was never that popular.
Okay.
So these Photomats, they were sort of little booths usually in the car parks of big shopping centres. In fact, I think maybe in Back to the Future they drive into one.
Oh, okay.
It's like that.
Yeah,
They looked like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that little hut that's in the car park. So, of course, naturally, there are no box office for this film, 0.
Right. Right.
Because it had no theatrical release.
Right.
So no way this film made money. No way.
Right.
Most people didn't even have VHSs in 1980.
Yeah.
It was very much kind of like a high-ticket item. And the producers were... So, Chinoy and the producer Kerry Stowell, who was the president of the production company, Stonemaier Enterprises, really unhappy about this.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Hugely unhappy about it. Stowell's quoted as saying, "Let's just say that distributor and dirty start with the same letter."
I would say this is one of the times often you hear a movie fails and then the crew is all like, yeah, the studio didn't promote it enough, as opposed to the quality of the movie.
Yeah.
I think this movie could have done pretty well.
Yes, it would have. It would have.
I think
would
it could have
taken their
made
kids to see it.
$2 million.
It absolutely would have. It got completely... And it never had a theatrical release. As you say, it showed on a couple of screens, I think a couple of years later.
Right.
And then eventually it was cut down for HBO.
Okay.
So what we saw is the cable TV edit.
Right. Okay, now I found this Facebook post with some people that were involved in production.
Oh, that link was dead for me. Anyway, go on.
And somebody there claimed that there are 3 edits.
Okay.
Okay, there's the original, what they intended. Then in 82, there was an HBO edit which added a bunch of narration. This is the Blade Runner cut.
That's what we got, because there's narration in it.
Right, but then there was an 84 Disney Home Video version which had slightly less narration.
Oh, maybe that's the one we got, because there wasn't a lot of narration in the one we had.
But that post said that it was the YouTube version. Every version from 84 to 91, that's the cable version, the Disney version, the VHS version, so that's what's on YouTube.
Okay.
It's not apparently the HBO version had a lot more. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but...
But, I mean, the point is we didn't get to see the theatrical, what would have been the theatrical
But then did you find in that Washington Post article at the time that they said it was 82 minutes long? And isn't that the length of the video that's on YouTube?
Yeah, it is. So perhaps it's as you said, it's just changing scene orders.
It could be, yeah.
And adding pointless narration.
Yeah.
But, I would like to see obviously I'd like to see the original one.
Yeah.
Part of what makes this upsetting is that they'd coincided the release of the film with a kind of get out the vote campaign.
Okay. Yeah.
So Kerry Stowell, the person who, the producer of the film, she's sort of a person with a social conscience. So one of those very socially active people. I found an obituary for her where it talked about the various roles that she performed over her life. She's a film producer, educational publisher, chair of the Women's National Bank, co-chairman of the Financial Women's Association of New York, board woman of American Women in Radio and Television and the American News Women's Club. She published books for pre-kindergarten, second grade children in the 1960s, books and tapes emphasizing a healthy body and aiming to deter early drug use. Founder of School Days Incorporated in 1973 and executive producer of the animated film Go Pogo in 1980. After moving to Washington, D.C., she became involved in local politics. She was editor of several small community newspapers. Huh. So just one of those people that just do everything and do it for love of the community, essentially. So she was inspired they were running this get out the vote campaign, so register people to vote. And it was going to tie in with the Pogo. So Pogo was the theme of the campaign. They were selling the badges again.
Yeah.
So you can get these badges. You can see them on eBay. I've seen, the Go Pogo badges. Yeah. So one's from the 1950s and one's from this campaign in 1980. Posters, T-shirts. They approached the Federal Electoral Commission in the US, volunteering Pogo to be our mascot, like a future mascot for future campaigns to encourage people to register for vote, because of course in America, unlike Australia, where you're automatically registered to vote, here in America it's not compulsory, as we all know. And it's a perennial problem that not enough people turn out to vote. It's
mentioned a lot of times in the Pogo campaign strips. Vote
early and often.
In fact, early and often, that's in the song. And in 56, it's really funny. There's a lot of stuff about it, but there's a strip in particular. As soon as they decide Pogo's running, Howland Owl shows up with a list of graveyards and Canadian voters.
Yes.
And then they're talking about getting kids to vote, and he's getting spiders. Like he says, if 18 spiders, 1-year-old spiders get together, that counts as a block vote, a single block vote. Stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. Was there?
No, that's it. Just
okay.
That was apparently doing quite well.
Right.
They'd started with $750 as seed money. They were working out of an office, presumably in another shopping mall, and it was. Yeah, they soon became self-financing. They were able to make enough money from selling kind of like pogo voting paraphernalia and it could have been a thing that would happen. You know, if this film, what they wanted, I mean, in the interviews, Chinoy and Stowell have both said that they hoped that this would become a staple of election. They hoped that people would, like, maybe in classrooms or... I mean, it's not really what you'd call educational, but it would be like a holiday movie. But one that was just shown every 4 years, or maybe even whenever, because there's always elections, and that you could run these campaigns to encourage voter registration at the same time with kind of pogo as the theme. They had high hopes, and it was all just dashed because this film never was. In the various interviews, like in the Washington Post and things like that, they're always talking about how they're trying to get another distributor. They're trying to attract overseas distribution in Europe. It's like, this movie's not gonna. No one's going to want to watch this movie in Europe. It's so American. Yeah. And of course, it never happened.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out some of the other voices, because we only mentioned Vincent Price. But Jonathan Winters does several voices in this.
Yep. He's Moles the Mole, and I think the bear as well.
No, the bear is Jimmy Breslin, the reporter. Who the famed reporters who was pals with Walt Kelly and even did a beer commercial with him in the 50s. You can find that beer ad. You can find stills from it online. I just want to point out, and Ruth Buzzi was the voice of Ms. Beaver and Mademoiselle Hepzibah. I wanted to point that out. This was a certain generation of actors that were maybe, I don't know where they stood in the 70s. They were affordable, let's say, by 79.
Sure, like Vincent Price. I'm sure he was pretty affordable.
Arnold Stang as Churchill Lefemme. I just want to mention him because he's going to come up again in a later episode.
Good.
Yeah, in live action. Okay, so are we going to end this episode without opening a tab on Pog?
No, how could I let that go by?
Okay, ring the bell. This is issue 32 of Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing.
Which we have covered on the podcast
We have covered on the podcast. At this point, in issue 31, or the issue before it anyway, Swamp Thing had gone through hell, literally gone to hell to rescue his girlfriend, Abigail Arcane, and brings her back. And the following issue, suddenly, you get the smash cut to this very bizarre story. It's not drawn by the usual art team of Stephen Bissett and John Totalman, which was very, tense. There's this kind of nervousness about their art. It's very detailed and full and lush. Suddenly we get this Sean McManus issue. Now, I have to assume, I'm not even going to say assume, I'm going to just say I know. Alan Moore was told that Sean McManus is going to draw issue 32, and he'd drawn a previous issue. And they're like, okay, what's going on in Alan Moore's brain? He's like, okay, Swamp Thing's in a swamp. Who else is in a swamp? Pogo. Suddenly, we get this issue where this alien spaceship shows up. You've got 3 characters, cartoony-looking characters in spacesuits. One is your Pogo. Yep. One is your Albert one is your Porcupine. Yep. They're in a spaceship, which is shaped as like a turtle, and it's called Find the Lady, or Cherchez la Femme, you might say, is the name of this ship, because they're looking for a lady, which is a home planet, because their home planet was taken over by these meat-eating creatures that tortured and killed and ate them, so they're looking for a new world, and they've crash landed on this world, and they meet with something, and they talk in this bizarre Alan Moore alien dialect, which is like weirdly fractured grammar, strange words and malapropisms and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And, the first time I read that, I was like, oh, this is weird. What is this? Yep. And then after I read Pogo for the first time, maybe 25 years ago, and then reread that issue of something, I was like, oh, this is actually the best issue of something. It's so Alan Moore, because you can see all the seeds of his entire career is laid out there, right? Your League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, your Lost Girls. Oh, it's all these, hey, wait, all these characters are alive in 1912. Let's have them hang out in one place. And he's tapped into it, and he's played with the language in all the same ways, and how he is always writing different languages for characters and stuff. And that's all I wanted to say about that that tab.
I felt the same way when I first read Swamp Thing, and it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It's cartoon animals in Swamp Thing.
Cartoon animals.
Swamp Thing, which has been deeply, deeply serious.
Yes. And Shawn McManus draws in a kind of cartoony style, right? Yeah. So Elmore's like, okay, we got to have something cartoony for Shawn to draw. And,
after you said, Pogs, I've got some texts from when you reread it.
Okay.
So you said, having just reread Pog, I'm forced to conclude that it is one of the finest single issues of any comic ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I read it and replied later that day, made up language, tick. Crossover weirdness, tick. Made me feel things, tick. Deconstruction, tick. Cartoons talking to monsters and there's no irony, tick.
Yes. Yes.
And last of all, playing weird shit totally straight, tick.
Yes.
So I'm forced to agree. This is a microcosm of Alan Moore's whole career.
Yes. Yes. Okay, let's do our votes. So, where are you landing with the comic?
For me, the comic is yay.
Yeah.
As I said, I think if you read it as it's meant to be read, a strip a day.
A strip a day, yeah.
Or maybe even less than a strip a day, an absolute joy. I can imagine looking forward to reading it every single day.
Yeah.
It's so nice to look at. It's so funny. There's something there for everybody. For kids, for adults. As you said, there's literary references.
Yeah.
There's the joy of the wordplay. It's really, really something.
Yeah.
And also, it's an absolute kind of trailblazer. Enormously influential from everyone from Alan Moore to all of those other people that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Strip writers for decades to come, right up to the present day. And brave.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I found an interview with him. So in that book, that 1959 book that I quoted from earlier, Walt Kelly said why did Walt Kelly write this comic? Why did Charles Schultz write Peanuts? He wanted to make bank, right? No merchandising opportunity. Yeah. On the other hand, merchandising for Pogo there's so little of it that every Pogo piece of merchandise ever produced is listed on the Wikipedia page.
Right, okay.
And it's only about a dozen things. And he writes in his book, every once in a while, some grinning gargoyle of a dedicated liberal, searching for meaning, a professional liberal who believes in liberalism rather than liberty, comes grinning at me with teeth set like a jack-o'-lantern and says, Walter, tell me, what are you trying to do? What's behind the strip? The answer is simple, but unacceptable to such questioners. I've hinted at it all along. I'm trying to have fun and make money at the same time. More funny Kelly kind of wit. However, he says that, but I don't think a person trying to have fun and make money is the kind of person that takes on Joseph McCarthy at that height of his influence, of his ability to destroy people's careers, just on the suspicion that they had any kind of communist sympathy, or had just criticised him. Because if you criticised him, you were tarred and feathered with the same brush, right? And this is when told by newspaper editors that they were going to drop his strip if he put Malarkey back in. Not only does he put Malarkey back in, but takes the piss out of them by having him hide his face and naming them.
Yeah.
No one from Rhode Island can see me.
Yes.
And then making him look like the KKK. This is not a guy that's just in it for a buck. This is a brave man making art that he believes in. So I'm very impressed by this comic on all kind of fronts, so it's there for me.
Yeah, it's one of the all-time greats, I think. As you said, the interesting thing about not being able to read a bunch in a row is often we talk about, we've had some daily strips where we read a bunch in a row and then the timeline seems weird. It's like, well, this should be taking place over weeks or months, and it's all happening 3 strips down the line, and it's like, we're supposed to be reading them one a day. In this case, it's for a different reason. It's hard to absorb a bunch in a row. I guess there's the reread value looking back now, but he also would put out those books every year that would collect the best ofs or whatever. So, it's just one of the greats. It's hard to add any more to it. Beautifully drawn, amazingly written, surprising at every turn, and it's like reading an animation, as I mentioned at the start. It's just going on all engines. All right, how about this movie?
Right, okay. As disappointed I am that this movie was screwed, and as beautiful as it looks, it's probably going to be nay for me.
Yeah.
it's well, for one thing, the version that we saw wasn't very good quality, so it's hard to make out what was going on a lot of the time.
Yep.
But it's confusing at times. I think there's too much going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the strip in that respect.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to adaptation.
But yeah.
But yeah, I think it's certainly there are some funny moments, and a lot of the dialogue is there are some lines that are really good, like ones that you want to write down, like real crackers, real pearls of wisdom that you could see in a book of quotations. Yeah. But a lot of it's kind of just very obvious.
Yeah.
We need a liar. Oh, all politicians are liars.
Yeah.
And some of the humor is stuff like the slapstick. Why is this here? Is Pogo a slapstick book? Is slapstick really funny?
Yeah.
I don't... So, yeah, it's not... For me, it's nay. I'm not going to be watching this again.
No, I wanted to like it.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, I really wanted to... You can see the love that went into it. They've really tried. Somehow it's falling down. I think the reason it's falling down is on the adaptation side of it, so I won't jump too far ahead, but... yeah, it's all the things you've said. It's almost, it looks really good in the stills, like those Viewmaster stills, if you watch the YouTube videos.
I feel you can watch it, it's funny. Alright, I'm going to jump to adaptation.
Okay,
I think this is a great adaptation.
Interesting.
Well, when I say great, no, not a great adaptation. This is an adaptation. I'm saying yay, because it's like the strip. I think you can watch 5 minutes of this film and love it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, that you've nailed it, I think. Reading those strips, I didn't read through them once. I'd have to linger, try to figure out what people were saying, stuff like that. Do double takes at some of the stuff I was looking at. Kind of appreciate all the feathering he did with the inking and stuff like that. Somehow these gags, like the gag about who's for Vice, which I mentioned in the movie, they're just whizzing past.
Yeah. The pace of the film is much too quick. It's much too quick. You haven't got time to appreciate what's happening before it's moved on to the next scene.
And yet the characters move around too slowly in some way.
There's an odd comparison of frenetic pace and kind of like constrained movement and action.
Yeah.
But I think, as I said, like the strip, this would be great for like YouTube.
Yeah.
Well, it's already on YouTube, but I mean, imagine if this was like a YouTube series.
Yeah. To watch one joke at a time, or like a minute at a time, might work better than as an 85-minute movie.
Yeah.
TikTok series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why this could have a second life on social media.
Yeah.
This film. I don't. Yeah. If they could clean up the audio a bit, if someone could find the original.
Take out the music.
Some of those Photomat VHSs must still be around somewhere.
Oh yeah, that's right, because it would be the original version. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone knows, but there are other things. Casting, as I said before, casting Vincent Price as the voice of the Deacon.
Yeah.
The man who speaks in Gothic font.
That's true. Yeah.
What genius! Yeah. I'm sure he was cheap in '79, but what a great piece of casting. And of course, they look like the strip come to life.
Yes.
They couldn't look more like the strip, especially the Sunday, the Sunday strips, the colours.
In fact, wasn't his widow actually speaking to another studio about doing a traditional animation?
Yes, that's right. So, kind of like with Bakshi, where he was looking for something, he knew he wanted to do an adult animation. Here, Chinoy and Stowell had this filming technique that they wanted to use, the flexiform. And they sort of both at the same time, they said they were out to dinner, and they both almost at the same time said, Pogo.
Right, okay.
And apparently they didn't even finish dinner, got up, dashed to the phone, called their agent, said, find me whoever has the rights to Pogo.
Okay.
In more than one place I read, less than 24 hours, they were meeting with Walt Kelly's widow.
Okay.
They told her what they wanted, they took her presumably to the shopping centre.
Yeah.
Showed him the materials. Yeah. She was, as you said, she was apparently so impressed that she broke off negotiations that she was currently doing with NBC for a traditionally animated TV series.
Okay.
Based on
a series. Okay, right. Interesting.
Yeah. Maybe that was a bad move.
I don't think... I think a series would have been bad. It would have been Saturday morning.
Well, of course it would have been bad, but it might have actually made money.
Yes, that's true.
Whereas this absolutely did not make money.
Yes.
No way this made money.
Yes.
Yeah. So, that's a shame.
Okay, so I was going to come down nay on adaptation, but you're so right that they've tried to fit it all on there.
Yeah. And it's got that same... It's even got that uneasy combination of... Well, I don't know if I'd call it uneasy. Maybe it's only uneasy in the film. Combination of wordy stuff suitable for grown-ups and stuff kids dig.
Yeah, I'm going to say yay. I'm going to switch to yay. I do think the tone is different than the comic.
Yeah.
But they have tried to make the characters look right. There's lines from the comic in it. There's nothing in the comic there's nothing in the movie that's not in the comic for the most part, as far as I can tell. There's just some clumsiness about it. I think we might even rate the movie higher if we had a clear DVD copy of it.
I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think I probably would, because it's hard to make out what they're saying a lot of the time. Just to finish up, a little note here. Did you notice when you were reading the comic that at one point a beetle shows up with a birthday cake?
Yes.
A beetle shows up with a birthday cake with a single candle.
Yeah.
So people might remember the week that we did Blondie, where Chick Young had a little child, had a child die in infancy and couldn't bring himself to draw a baby dumpling in the strip for years afterwards.
Yeah.
Walt Kelly had a little girl who died just before her first birthday in October.
Okay.
And to commemorate that in the strip, he put in this little beetle who showed up every year.
Looking for someone to...
Looking for the girl...
To give the cake
to.
Holy shit. Okay. That's full on. All right. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Please comment. Please send us an email at the email address in the show notes. Please join our Patreon. At patreon.com/comicbookmovieoblivion, all one word. We do need the funds for hosting fees, etc.
We got to track down this Photomat copy.
Oh yeah, the Photomat VHS. We need that. Yeah.
Posterity.
Yes. What was next? Was that it?
What we're doing next week?
Oh, is it next week? Okay. Next week we're going to do Steel from 1997.
This one's going to be very different. This is going to be a real change of pace.
It's kind of a mess of comics, but there is a best of out there. But basically it's like action. It's Adventures of Superman number 500 and maybe like Steel number 1. We're only going to read a few of the early appearances, but there's a collection out there called, I think, The Best of Steel, which is pretty recent. It was like a 25th anniversary thing or something. So
that'll do.
If you can find that will be...
So if you want to find out what Steel is and what Shaq has to do with it, tune in next week.
Yes, Mingo, so Pogo, go, Killa, ha ha, go. Patsy, go to Frisco, go to Fargo. Oh, keep and keep playing, a possum on a pogo. Stick around and see the show. Go overland alive, a band of jive will blow, go pogo. I go, you go, who go, to go, Parley-Voo, go. From Caravan Diego, oh, Waco and Oswego. To Italy, he go, she go, we go, me go, pogo.